There is a quiet war happening inside you right now. Not loud, not dramatic. No one around you can see it, but it is the most important battle you will ever fight. And it decides everything. Your peace, your power, your future. The Stoics knew something most people never learn. The people who rise above suffering, who become calm in chaos, who build a life of quiet strength. They didn't add more to their lives. They subtracted, they eliminated, silently, without announcement, without permission, without telling anyone. And today, I'm going to show you the 10 things you must remove from your life. Quietly, deliberately, permanently, if you ever want to become the version of yourself that nothing can break. Stay until the end, because number 7 is the one most people are too afraid to even admit. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient wisdom meets modern struggle. Here we don't just talk about philosophy. We use it. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, men who ruled empires, survived exile, and faced death with steady hands, left us a blueprint not for comfort, but for strength. If you're new here, consider subscribing, because every video on this channel is built to make you harder to disturb and easier to respect. Now let's begin. Most self-improvement advice tells you what to add. Wake up earlier, read more books, build new habits, network more, hustle harder. But the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they understood something deeper. True strength isn't built by addition, it's revealed by subtraction. Think of a sculptor standing before a block of marble. Michelangelo didn't say he created David. He said David was already inside the stone. He simply removed everything that wasn't David. That is the Stoic path to becoming who you're meant to be. The strongest version of you is already inside you, buried under noise, distraction, fear, and other people's opinions. Your job isn't to build a new person. It's to chip away everything false. And here's the part nobody tells you. This elimination has to happen quietly. Why quietly? Because the moment you announce your transformation, you invite resistance. You invite doubt. You invite the very people who benefit from your weakness to suddenly have opinions about your strength. Seneca warned about this when he wrote to his friend Lucilius. He said that a man who lives according to nature will never be poor, and a man who lives according to opinion will never be rich. The opinions of others are a prison if you let them in, before your transformation is complete. So this video isn't a list you check off and post about. It's a private reckoning. 10 things. Quiet removal. No applause needed. Grab a notebook if you have one nearby, because I guarantee at least 3 of these are going to sting. Let's begin with the first one. And it's the one almost everyone underestimates. The first thing you must quietly eliminate is your need for approval. Somewhere along the way, you learned to scan rooms before speaking. You learned to measure your worth by the reactions on other people's faces. A slight frown from your mother. A pause before your boss responds to your idea. A friend who doesn't like your post. And without realizing it, you built your entire identity on a foundation that other people control. Epictetus, who was born a slave and later became one of the most respected philosophers in Rome, taught something radical for his time. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. Our opinions, our judgments, our desires, our actions, these are ours. But the opinions others hold of us, that belongs entirely to them. Chasing it is like chasing smoke. You will exhaust yourself and never hold anything real. Think about how much energy you spend each day trying to be liked. The careful wording of a text message so no one is offended. The rehearsed laugh at a joke that wasn't funny. The silence when you disagreed but stayed quiet to keep the peace. Each of these moments is a small tax on your soul. And over years, that tax compounds into a person who doesn't know what they actually think anymore, because they've spent so long thinking about what others want them to think. Here's a story. There was a Roman senator named Helvidius Priscus, a student of Stoic philosophy, who refused to bow to the approval of Emperor Vespasian. The emperor warned him to stay silent in the Senate, to not voice his opposing opinions. Priscus responded that it was within the emperor's power to take his life, but not within his power to make him say what he did not believe. He valued the approval of his own conscience over the approval, or even the mercy, of the most powerful man in the world. That is what it looks like to eliminate the need for approval. Not recklessness, not rebellion for its own sake, just an unshakable inner compass that no external opinion can move. You don't have to make a speech about this. You don't have to tell your friends, "I'm done seeking approval now." That would defeat the purpose, because announcing it is, ironically, still seeking approval, just dressed up as defiance. Instead, do it quietly. The next time you feel the urge to change your answer because you sense disapproval, pause. Ask yourself, is this what I actually believe? Or is this what will make them comfortable? That pause, repeated daily, is how the chains loosen. Picture your life 5 years from now if you continue seeking approval the way you do today. Picture the version of you who has fully eliminated it. Which one do you respect more? Which one sleeps better at night? The answer is obvious, but living it is the work. The second thing to quietly eliminate is complaining, not venting in a healthy, time-limited way to process emotion. That has its place. I mean the habitual, repetitive complaining that has become your default language. The weather, the traffic, the economy, your job, your relationship, your body. Complaining has become, for many people, the primary way they bond with others. Misery loves company, and complaining is the handshake of the miserable. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man on earth during his reign, ruling an empire stretched across 3 continents, facing war, plague, and betrayal, wrote in his private journal something he never intended anyone else to read, that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If you constantly dye your mind with complaint, you become complaint. Your default lens on existence becomes negative, and you stop noticing the structure is even there. It becomes invisible to you, like a fish that doesn't notice water. Here's what's fascinating and slightly terrifying. Neuroscience now confirms what Marcus intuited 2,000 years ago. The brain operates on something called neuroplasticity. The neural pathways you use most often become stronger, faster, more automatic. If your daily habit is to scan your environment for what's wrong, your brain becomes extraordinarily efficient at finding what's wrong. You're not noticing reality more accurately by complaining. You're training a search algorithm that returns more and more negative results over time. Think about the people in your life who complain constantly. Are they magnetic? Do you walk away from conversations with them feeling energized, expanded, alive? Or do you feel slightly heavier, slightly more drained? Now ask yourself honestly, when others walk away from conversations with you, which feeling do you leave them with? This is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. Growth always feels like a small loss before it feels like anything else. The Stoic method here isn't suppression. Seneca never said, "Pretend everything is fine." He said something far more useful. When something happens that you don't like, the question isn't, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "What does this require of me?" That single shift from victim to participant transforms complaint into strategy. Try this quietly, starting today. Every time you feel the urge to complain, replace it internally with one question: what is within my control here? If nothing is, accept it and redirect your energy. If something is, act on it instead of narrating it. You don't need to tell people you're not complaining anymore. Just stop doing it. Watch how the people around you respond when you become a person who discusses solutions instead of grievances. Watch how your own mind begins to feel lighter, like you've been carrying a backpack full of stones you didn't know you could put down. The third thing you must quietly eliminate is comparison, specifically the kind that poisons rather than motivates. We live in the most comparison-saturated era in human history. Every scroll of your phone is a parade of curated highlights. Someone's vacation, someone's promotion, someone's relationship, someone's body. And your mind, which evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to compare itself to perhaps 150 people in a tribe, is now comparing itself to millions of strangers, each presenting their best edited frame. Seneca wrote to Lucilius that no man can be content with his own portion who looks over his neighbor's fence. And that line was written before electricity, let alone Instagram. Imagine what he would say now. Here's the deeper Stoic insight. Though comparison isn't actually about other people, it's about your relationship with what philosophers call external goods, things outside your control. Wealth, beauty, status, possessions. The Stoics called these indifferents, not because they don't matter at all, but because they are not the foundation of a good life. They can be used well or badly, but they should never be the measuring stick for your worth. There's a story about Cato the Younger, a Stoic statesman known for his incorruptible character. He would deliberately wear plain, even unfashionable clothing in public, not out of poverty, but as a practice in detaching his sense of self from the approval and comparison of fashionable Roman society. He trained himself to feel comfortable being judged, so that judgment would lose its grip on him. This wasn't about rejecting nice things. It was about not needing them to feel whole. Here's a practical reframe. When you see someone with something you want, their career, their relationship, their body, their freedom, instead of asking, "Why don't I have that?" ask, "What did that cost them? And am I willing to pay that price?" Almost always, you'll discover that what you see is only the visible 10% of an iceberg. You don't see the failures, the loneliness, the specific sacrifices, the years of unglamorous effort. You are comparing your behind the scenes to their highlight reel, and that comparison is mathematically guaranteed to make you feel inadequate, because it is not an honest comparison at all. Quietly eliminate this. Don't announce a social media detox to everyone you know. That becomes its own performance. Just begin privately asking the deeper question every time envy arises. Over time, the impulse to compare weakens, not because you suppress it, but because you starve it of the false logic it depends on. The fourth thing to quietly eliminate, and this is one of the hardest, is your tolerance for people who consistently drain you. I want to be careful here, because this isn't about cutting off everyone who challenges you or disagrees with you. Growth often comes from people who push back, who hold you accountable, who tell you uncomfortable truths. Those people are valuable, even when they're difficult. What I'm talking about is something different, people whose presence consistently leaves you smaller, more anxious, more self-doubting, not because they're helping you grow, but because their patterns are corrosive. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about this in his private meditations, reminding himself almost daily to start the morning by acknowledging that he would meet people who are ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and surly, and that he must not let their behavior infect his own character. But notice, he didn't say avoid all difficult people, because as emperor, he couldn't. What he did was protect his internal state from being hijacked by their behavior. But here's what's important for your real life, where you have more choice than an emperor surrounded by senators. You are not obligated to keep every person in your life simply because they've been there a long time, or because you feel guilty, or because removing them feels harsh. Seneca was explicit about this. He said that we should associate with those who will make us better and welcome those whom we can make better, and that this exchange should be mutual. If a relationship has become a one-way drain, where you give and receive only exhaustion in return, the Stoic position is clear. Protect your time, because time is the one resource you genuinely cannot get back. Here's a quiet exercise that costs you nothing and reveals everything. Think of the 5 people you spend the most time with. After spending time with each of them, do you typically feel more capable, more grounded, more yourself, or smaller, more anxious, more depleted? You don't need to confront anyone. You don't need a dramatic conversation or a public falling out. You simply, quietly, begin to redirect your time and energy toward what gives you life and away from what drains it. Some relationships will naturally fade as you do this. That's not coldness. That's wisdom. There's a difficult truth the Stoics understood that modern self-help often avoids. Not everyone is meant to be in your life forever, and that's not a tragedy. It's the natural order of things. Trees don't apologize for shedding leaves in autumn. The shedding makes room for new growth. The fifth thing to quietly eliminate is the unconscious, compulsive relationship you have with your phone, specifically with the apps engineered to fracture your attention. This isn't a lecture about screen time. Though the numbers are staggering, the average person checks their phone over 100 times a day, often without even consciously deciding to. This is about something the Stoics valued above almost everything else: the integrity of your mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind that is free from passions is a citadel. Nothing can take it by storm, because there is nothing more secure to which a man can fly for refuge and be thereafter inexpugnable. But what happens when you voluntarily hand the keys to that citadel to an algorithm designed by some of the most brilliant engineers on Earth, specifically built to capture and monetize your attention? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your attention is not a renewable resource in the way you think it is. Where your attention goes repeatedly, your character follows. If your attention is constantly fragmented between 15-second videos, notifications, and the dopamine loop of checking for likes, you are training your mind to be incapable of the sustained, deep focus that builds anything meaningful: a skill, a relationship, a piece of work you're proud of, even a peaceful inner life. This isn't about throwing your phone in a lake. The Stoics were not opposed to tools. They were opposed to being enslaved by them. Seneca, ironically, wrote about the very same compulsive restlessness in his own era. Though there were no phones, people would travel from place to place, seeking distraction from themselves, never able to sit still with their own minds. He called it a sickness of the soul, this inability to bear one's own company. The quiet elimination here looks like this. You don't need to announce a digital detox or post about going offline. You simply start privately, building small pockets of phone-free time. The first 20 minutes of your morning, untouched by a screen. Mealtimes, phone in another room. Walks without earbuds, just you and your thoughts. However uncomfortable that silence feels at first. Notice, and this is important, notice the anxiety that comes up in that silence. That anxiety is information. It's telling you how much you've outsourced your inner peace to a device. The goal isn't to perform self-discipline for others to see. It's to quietly take back the citadel. The sixth thing to quietly eliminate is one of the most painful, because it requires admitting something most people spend their whole lives avoiding: the identity of being a victim of your circumstances. I want to be careful and precise here, because there is an important distinction. Acknowledging real harm done to you, abuse, betrayal, injustice, loss, is not the same as building your entire identity around that harm. The Stoics never denied that terrible things happen to people. Epictetus himself was enslaved, beaten so severely by his master that he was left permanently lame. He did not deny the reality of suffering. What he refused to do was let that suffering become the architecture of his entire identity for the rest of his life. This is the core of Stoic philosophy, and it's worth sitting with carefully. Events themselves do not have the power to harm your character. Only your judgment about those events has that power. Something happened to you. That is a fact, and facts deserve acknowledgement, even grief, even anger if appropriate. But the story you tell yourself about what that event means about your future, your worth, your capability, that story is something you have far more control over than you've been led to believe. Here's why this one is so quiet and so private. You cannot announce to others, "I'm no longer going to be a victim of my past," because that statement itself often becomes another performance, another identity to manage, another way of seeking approval for your healing. Real elimination of victim identity happens in the small, unwitnessed moments. It happens when you catch yourself about to explain away a missed opportunity by blaming your childhood, and instead you ask quietly, internally, what is the next right action I can take? regardless of what happened to me. Marcus Aurelius lost multiple children. He buried more of his own family than most people experience in several lifetimes. He ruled during a plague that killed millions, including eventually likely contributing to his own death. He had every justification to build an identity around suffering. Instead, his journal, written for no one's eyes but his own, repeats one idea constantly: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He did not pretend the plague wasn't real, or that his grief wasn't real. He simply refused to let those facts dictate his character. This is hard. I'm not going to pretend it's simple. If you're carrying real trauma, real injustice, this isn't a video that replaces the support of a therapist or real healing work. Please seek that if you need it. But philosophically, quietly, privately, there is enormous power in separating "this happened to me" from "this is who I am now." The first is history. The second is a choice you're making, often unconsciously, every single day. Now we arrive at number 7, the one I promised you at the beginning. The one most people are too afraid to admit, because admitting it feels like giving up on hope itself. The 7th thing you must quietly eliminate is the fantasy of a perfect future that excuses you from living fully now. Here's what I mean. So many of us live in a kind of suspended animation, waiting until we lose the weight to really start living, waiting until the promotion comes to finally feel successful, waiting until the relationship is perfect to feel loved, waiting until we have more money to feel secure. We have quietly, almost without noticing, outsourced our entire experience of being, alive to a future moment that we keep pushing further away. This is one of the cruelest tricks the mind plays, because it disguises itself as ambition, as hope, as planning. It feels productive to imagine the perfect future. But Seneca had a name for this trap. He called it living in preparation for life, rather than actually living. He wrote that the greatest waste of life is delay, that we are always getting ready to live, but never actually living, and that while we wait, life is rushing past us. Think about the actual math of this. The average human life is roughly 4,000 weeks if you're fortunate enough to live to 80. That's it, 4,000. Not 4,000 years, weeks. How many of yours have you already spent in a state of, once this happens, then I'll really begin? How many more are you planning to spend the same way? Marcus Aurelius confronted this directly. He reminded himself that he could leave this life at any moment, not as a morbid obsession, but as a clarifying tool. He wrote that you could die right now. Let that determine what you do. Say and think. This wasn't pessimism. It was the opposite. It was a tool to strip away the fantasy that there will always be more time to start living the way you actually want to live. Here's why this one is quiet, and why it's so frightening to admit. Admitting that you've been postponing your real life means admitting that the version of you who has been preparing might have been, on some level, afraid. Afraid that if you actually tried fully now, without the excuse of "I'll really commit once conditions are perfect," you might fail, and then you'd have no more excuses left. The fantasy of a perfect future is, in a strange way, a comfortable prison, because it lets you avoid the risk of trying with everything you have right now. Quietly eliminating this doesn't mean abandoning goals or planning. The Stoics were not opposed to ambition. It means closing the gap between the life you're living and the life you say you're waiting for. It means asking yourself, privately today, what would I do differently in the next 24 hours if I stopped waiting for permission from some future circumstance? And then doing that thing, not announcing it, just doing it. If you're still here with me, I want you to notice something. We're past the halfway point, and the things on this list are not getting easier. They're getting more honest. That's intentional. The Stoics never promised comfort. They promised clarity, and clarity is sometimes uncomfortable before it becomes liberating. If this is landing for you even a little, drop a comment with the number that hit hardest so far. I read these, and they remind me why this channel exists. Now let's continue, because the next three might be the most important of all. The eighth thing to quietly eliminate is the compulsive habit of over-explaining and justifying your decisions to people who were never going to understand them anyway. Notice how often you do this. Someone asks why you left a job, and instead of a simple answer, you give a 5-minute defense. Someone questions a boundary you set, and instead of holding it calmly, you over-explain until the boundary dissolves under the weight of your own justification. This habit comes from a deep, often unconscious, belief that your choices are only valid if others approve of the reasoning behind them. The Stoics had a striking perspective on this. Marcus Aurelius wrote that it is not necessary to let other people know about most of what you do, even good things, even right things. He believed that constantly narrating and justifying your actions to others actually cheapens them, makes your peace of mind dependent on external validation rather than your own clear conscience. There's something almost paradoxical here that's worth sitting with. The more you explain yourself, the weaker your position often becomes, even when you're right, because over-explanation signals, often unconsciously, that you yourself aren't fully convinced. Confidence rarely needs a paragraph. It often just needs a sentence or even silence. This doesn't mean becoming cold or withholding genuine communication with people who deserve explanation. Your spouse, your close family, people directly affected by your choices. This is about the instinctive over-explaining to acquaintances, critics, and people whose opinions shouldn't carry weight in your decision-making in the first place. The co-worker who questions why you didn't attend the optional after-work event. The extended family member who has opinions about your career choice. The stranger online with feedback on your life they were never asked for. Quietly eliminating this looks like practicing the short answer. That didn't work for me anymore. Instead of a 10-minute justification for leaving a relationship or job, I've decided not to. Instead of constructing an elaborate defense for declining an invitation. Watch how uncomfortable this feels at first. That discomfort is the muscle of people-pleasing finally being asked to relax. And watch over time how much energy returns to you that was previously spent managing other people's understanding of your life. The ninth thing to quietly eliminate is your white-knuckled grip on outcomes. The exhausting need to control results that were never fully yours to control in the first place. This is, in many ways, the philosophical center of all Stoic thought. So let's slow down here. Epictetus opened his most famous teaching with this exact distinction. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. Up to us, our judgments, our intentions, our effort, our character. Not up to us, the actions of other people, the timing of events, the outcomes of situations we can influence but never fully command. Even our own health and reputation, which depend partly on forces outside ourselves. Almost all human anxiety, when you trace it back far enough, comes from confusing these two categories. You pour your effort into a job application and then spend weeks anxious about whether you'll get it, even though the decision is now entirely in someone else's hands. You love someone fully and then live in quiet dread of whether they'll leave, even though their choices were never yours to make. You do everything right and still find yourself bracing for an outcome you cannot govern. There's a famous archery metaphor the Stoics used that I find incredibly clarifying. An archer should do everything within their control. Practice, form, aim, breath, with total dedication and excellence. But the moment the arrow leaves the bow, its flight is influenced by wind, by the target moving, by forces beyond the archer's hands. A wise archer pours everything into the part they control and releases attachment to the part they don't. A foolish archer either doesn't try hard enough in the parts they control, or torments themselves over the parts they never could control in the first place. Marcus Aurelius applied this even to the outcome that frightens humans most, death itself, his own and his loved ones. He didn't pretend not to care. He simply recognized that pouring his anxiety into outcomes he couldn't govern was a misallocation of the only resource that mattered. his present attention and effort. This elimination is quiet because it happens in your nervous system more than in your conversations. It looks like noticing in real time when you're white-knuckling an outcome, the job offer, the text message reply, the test result, the medical news, and then gently redirecting your focus to what is actually still within your hands. Have you done what you can do? Then the rest is not yours to carry. This won't feel natural at first. Your nervous system has likely spent years rehearsing anxious control, but each time you catch yourself and redirect, you're quietly retraining it. We've reached the 10th and final thing, and in many ways, it's the culmination of everything we've discussed. The 10th thing you must quietly eliminate is the false self you've built and performed for the approval of others. This is the deepest one, so let's take our time. Somewhere across your life, childhood, school, early relationships, your career, you learned which version of yourself got rewarded and which version got punished, ignored, or shamed. And slowly, often without any conscious decision, you built a persona, a more agreeable version, a less threatening version, a version that laughs at jokes that aren't funny, agrees with opinions it doesn't hold, shrinks its ambitions so as not to make others uncomfortable, hides its true desires because they once led to disappointment or ridicule. This false self isn't a villain. It was built originally as protection. A child who learns that expressing anger leads to punishment will learn to suppress anger. A young person whose dreams were mocked will learn to shrink their dreams before anyone else can. The false self is, in its origin, an act of survival. But here's the painful truth the Stoics force us to confront. A survival strategy that once protected you can become, years later, the very prison that prevents you from living. Marcus Aurelius wrote something extraordinary on this subject. He said that very little is needed to make a happy life, and that it is all within yourself, in your way of thinking, not your way of performing. Your way of thinking. He understood that the gap between who you privately are and who you publicly perform yourself to be is the precise location where suffering accumulates. Every moment spent maintaining a false self is a moment of internal friction, attacks on your peace. Here's a question worth sitting with, privately, no one watching, no one to perform for. If no one in your life would judge you, disapprove of you, or be disappointed in you, what would you actually want? What would you say? What would you pursue? What would you stop doing immediately? The gap between your honest answer to that question and your actual current life is the precise size of the false self you've been carrying. This elimination, more than any other on this list, must be quiet. Not because you're hiding it, but because it cannot be performed. The moment you try to dramatically announce the real me to everyone around you, you risk simply constructing a new performance, a new persona built around the idea of authenticity rather than authenticity itself. The real work happens in small, private moments. The conversation where you say what you actually think instead of what keeps the peace. The career decision made from your own values instead of your family's expectations. The hobby pursued purely because you love it, with no audience, no validation, no metrics. Epictetus, who endured slavery and physical disability, arrived at one of the most liberating ideas in all of philosophy, that you are not your body, not your reputation, not your possessions, not even your role in society. You are your faculty of choice, your capacity to judge, to respond, to direct your own mind. Everything else can be taken from you. That cannot. When you stop performing a false self for others and start living from that inner faculty, you become, in the Stoic sense, finally free, not free from circumstances, but free from the exhausting project of managing other people's perception of you. 10 things, quietly eliminated. No announcements, no performance, no applause required. The need for approval, complaining, toxic comparison, people who drain you, your phone's grip on your attention, the victim identity, the fantasy of a perfect future, the habit of over-explaining yourself, the illusion of control over outcomes, and finally, the false self you've performed for others. Notice that none of these required you to add anything to your life. No new habit to maintain, no new system to manage, no new identity to perform. Just removal, just the quiet, patient work of becoming more fully yourself by clearing away what was never truly you in the first place. This is the entire genius of Stoic philosophy, practiced by emperors and former slaves alike, by people who ruled empires and people who owned nothing but their own minds. The good life was never about acquisition. It was about subtraction, chipping away at the marble until what remains is simply, finally, undeniably you. I'm not going to tell you this will be easy. Marcus Aurelius didn't find it easy, and he had the resources of an empire behind him. Epictetus didn't find it easy, and he began with nothing but a broken leg and a sharp mind. But both of them discovered something that I hope you carry with you long after this video ends, that the elimination doesn't need witnesses to be real. It doesn't need to be announced, documented, or validated by anyone watching. It only needs to be true. So here's what I'll leave you with. Don't tell anyone about the 10 things you're eliminating. Don't post about it. Don't make it a performance. Just begin quietly today with whichever one struck you hardest. Let your actions speak in a language no announcement ever could. If this video gave you even a moment of clarity, the most useful thing you can do is sit with it in silence before you do anything else. But if you want to support this channel's ability to keep making content like this, a like helps more than you'd think, and subscribing means you won't miss what comes next. I read every comment, so tell me quietly if you'd like, or out loud if you're ready, which one of these 10 you're eliminating first. Until next time, stay grounded, stay clear, and remember, the obstacle is the way.